We have been doing a special study on what we call maturing the ministry. We're actually looking at the 6 different Hebrew words which are translated man in our English Bible, and see that these are actually stages of progression or of maturity within our life. A text that I have referred to several times from Colossians, the 4th chapter, verse 17, Paul says, say to Archippus, we believe that Archippus was actually the pastor of the church at Colossae, say to Archippus, take heed to the ministry which you have received in the Lord, that you may fulfill it. The key there is fulfilling the call of God upon our lives. Now, this particular lesson, I'm going to call it David the Great Giant Killer, because you can't think of giant killers without thinking of David. He is our hero, the one that stands out so clearly. And so we're going to look at his life at these different stages. Now, talking about potential, let me give you 3 different areas of potential that every one of us have within our lives. First is what we call physical potential. In the physical potential, and you have that there in the graph before you, you will see the age from the 10 to 20, 30, 40, the different decades through your life, from 10 to age 70, you do not reach your physical potential until age 25. That's where it peaks. And then it should level off and remain the same until about age 40, where at age 40 begins a gradual decline, and then sometime around age 65 or so, it begins to drop off more rapidly. Now, again, this is average, looking at everybody's life view. People may individually be a little bit different, but this is the average. Looking at our mental potential, the mental potential that we have, it does not peak until age 35. Now, you young people, stay with me here. I'm not saying that you're not intelligent. You are intelligent, but the problem is you don't have history. You don't know what happened yesterday. And so until you're able to reach a particular age, and they say the average is around age 35, you will not be able to gain the wisdom from the experiences that came yesterday. But if you'll notice the graph, once you reach 35, it remains the same until approximately age 70. Some people even beyond that their mind is just as sharp. Even though they are 80 or 90 years of age, they're still very sharp mentally. Now, let me show you a third graph on our potentials, what we call vocational potential. Vocational potential begins to peak at age 20. You'll see the sharper rise there until approximately age 50. From age 50 to age 65 is usually your peak potential that you have, the vocational potential that you have. Then it begins to drop off rapidly because of all the young warriors which are coming behind you. Now, if you take these 3 different graphs and overlay them, they show us something. For instance, looking at the physical potential, then looking at our mental potential, and then finally looking at our vocational potential. Now look at that for just a moment. What does this graph tell us so clearly? It tells us that our mind is one of the greatest powers of potential that we have. Even when physically we are losing strength and energy, our minds are still operating at top speed. Even when our vocational potential begins to drop off, we still have the mental capacity to be thinking very sharply. Now, what that says, we will not reach our potential if we don't develop our minds. It's been many years ago. I was actually 33 years of age. I can remember it so clearly as if, I thank God that the old gray matter's still working, but I can remember it very clearly, though it was years ago, and I was a young preacher, had preached a youth rally that night. There was quite a large number of young people there, and a lot of their pastors had come with them. There was an older gentleman, 65 years of age, walked up to me afterward, and he was crying, and he said to me, "Young man, that was a great sermon, and I can tell that you studied a lot to prepare that. That was a good message." He said, "I never studied when I was a young man. I worked with my hands. I built churches. I built parsonages. I did all the physical things with my hands, but now I am 65 years of age, and I can no longer physically do what I did when I was a young minister. And therefore, because I did not develop my mind, my ministry is finished. It is over." Well, those were wise words, and I took them very seriously to heart. But they're not only true for those that are involved in ministry, they are true for all of us. If we do not develop our mind, we will never reach our peak potential. Now, I want to take this graph that I just gave you and apply it to King David's life. We're going to look at David in particular as the great giant killer. In this graph, I have picked out 10 different events that happened to David that I think were the climatic experiences. These were the turning point experiences in his life. Let me take you through these quickly. The first one I see is where he was anointed by Samuel to become the next king. He was only a teenage boy, approximately 16 years of age when he was anointed by Samuel, and I give you the scripture reference for that. And then the second one is when he killed Goliath. We believe he was approximately 17 years of age when he killed Goliath. Everything changed at that moment in David's life. The third one is his relationship with Jonathan, when they formed a covenant, and Jonathan actually became a royal mentor to David, teaching him what it was like to be the king's son, what it was like to be a prince in Israel. The fourth one that I give you is, and I dropped this down on the scale because it was a negative experience, but it's when he was fleeing from King Saul. He's approximately age 22 when this happens to him. And for the next several years, he's running from Saul as Saul tries again and again to kill David. David handled it well, though, spiritually, and so he goes to the fifth experience, where he is crowned to become the king of Judah. Judah was his personal tribe, the tribe of his fathers. And so he's age 30. We know that one because the Bible tells us he was 30 years of age when he became the king of Judah. The sixth one is he's 37 years of age, and he is now crowned to be king of Israel. I only wish that on the graph that I could have continued to went higher and higher in David's spiritual experience. But the tragedy is, David reached his spiritual peak before age 40. It's a true saying. It's dangerous to succeed too soon. See, when you get to the top of the mountain, there's only one way to go, and that's what happens to David. And so the seventh experience that I have is the experience with Bathsheba. It changed everything in David's life. We think he was probably somewhere between 40 and 45 years of age when this experience happens to him. And he sins and not only commits adultery with her, but has her husband murdered, has her husband killed. He never spiritually recovered from that in his kingdom. The eighth one that I have is Absalom. Absalom was the crown prince. He was the one everyone thought was going to become the king of Israel. And he's trying to kill his own father. David is approximately between 50 to 55 years of age when Absalom gives his revolt, trying to destroy his own daddy. And then the ninth one is a giant by the name of Ishbi-Benob. Most people have never even heard of Ishbi-Benob, but Ishbi-Benob, according to the Bible, was a son of Goliath. He now has grown up and is a young warrior, and he is attempting to kill David. David is in his late 50s. I'm going to put his age approximately age 58 when Ishbi-Benob tries to kill him. And finally, then the 10th one is his experience with his son Adonijah. Adonijah, again, tries to overthrow his father and become the king of Israel. If it had not been for the relationship that David had with the prophet Nathan, it would have been a tragedy, and Solomon would have never become the king of Israel. Now, I give you that as a quick review because this raises some questions for us to answer. Questions like, who was the biggest giant in David's life? Was it Goliath or was it Bathsheba? It's quite obvious it was Bathsheba. See, what David did not understand is giants come in all forms, shapes, and sizes. And David had not prepared himself for what today we call the midlife crisis. He had not prepared himself for the giant of lust. And he fell before that. And as I said, it was a terrible fall. Now, how does he get to this place? How does this happen to him? I don't think that it was just because she was a beautiful young woman. There was many beautiful young women. What is it that's happening to David? Here's what's happening to David. David is still thinking like the young warrior instead of thinking like a father. In other words, he's 20 years behind the game mentally. He's still thinking of himself as a young man. I'm going to go out and fight the battle. I'm going to, and actually that's what he does. After this sin with Bathsheba, he goes back out on the battlefield again. And now he almost gets himself killed in his 50s because he's out on the battlefield trying to fight the battles. See, here's the problem. When you get to the top of the mountain, you must understand life is a journey. It's a journey. You're going somewhere. How do you stay on top of the mountain? You don't go anywhere. That's the only way you can stay there, is that you stay at the same location. Anywhere that David looks is down. And I think that's what's happening to him. Every time he looks in the mirror, he's thinking of himself as a young warrior, but, oh, there's gray in my beard now. What's happening to me? And the mirror keeps telling him, you're not as young as you used to be. You're not a young man anymore. Now, when that comes, what can revitalize a young man, a man's youth? What can cause him to, go back and be a youthful, invigorated young man again? Probably nothing more than a young woman. But he's not a young man anymore. They tell it as a joke, but it's actually a poor joke of the man that was teasing his wife. They said, when you turn 40, I'm going to trade you in for 2 20s. And she wisely replied, and you're not wired for 220? That is a humorous way of saying it, but it's the truth. And for David, I think this is what makes Bathsheba so attractive to him, is he's trying to find something that will make him young again. Instead of becoming the father that he ought to be, no, he's focusing on his past, trying to go back to being the young warrior again. See, David was a great king. David's a great worshiper. There's none greater in the Bible. I give you that. But I also suggest that David was not a good father. And there's many reasons that I would say that, but look at this one verse of Scripture. In 1 Kings, the 1st chapter, in verse 6, It's a powerful verse where it says of David and his relationship with Adonijah. Adonijah's just preparing to try to take the crown away from his father and become the king himself. And the Bible says in that verse, David had never one time asked his son, "What are you doing?" Now, every parent understands that verse. Because how many times have we said to our children, "What in the world are you doing now?" Because children are always doing something. I mean, they're full of energy. Life is exciting. Life is an experiment, and they're trying to learn. And so many times they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And a parent will ask that question again and again. What are you doing? David never asked it one time of his son. What that tells me, David did not value sons as he ought to have valued sons. He did not respect them, realizing this is my future. He does not realize the greatest thing in life is not being the king. What's going to happen when I die? There's so many people that are afraid of their mortality. Why should we fear it? Death is a part of this life. Just as much as being born is a part of life, dying is a part of life. And we should be living our life for that final moment. We should get there when the bell rings. Now, there is a business maxim. They give this same principle. They call it the sigmoid curve. The sigmoid curve. And what the sigmoid curve actually says is in everything, no matter what it is, physically, if it's mentally going to school, if it's vocationally working your job, everything in life, if it's the business world, if it's the church world, everything goes through these cycles. And they call it the sigmoid curve. The sigmoid curve says that as we're learning, as we're progressing, as we're advancing, we keep climbing higher and higher. We're on the ladder of success. We're on the road to success. We're climbing the mountain of success. But however, there is a climax for everything. There's a climax physically. I mentioned that. Happens about age 25. There's a climax mentally, happens about age 35. Everything in life is this way. Now, here's the secret. If we're going to continue growing and maturing and not come to the end of our days regretting our life, becoming bitter, becoming disillusioned, if we're going to come to the end of our life with a smile on our face and say, we did it right, then before you get to the top of the mountain, you've got to start looking for new opportunities. In King David's life, for instance, he's the king. He's climbing the mountain until he becomes the greatest king in all the area. But now that he's the greatest king, what's he going to conquer next? What is the next stage? The next stage would have been his sons. And what they say with the sigmoid curve, before you get to the top of the mountain, you break out with another opportunity. Such for David would have been his sons. If he would have begun thinking through the eyes of a father, looking at his sons as the next potential for him, if he'd have been thinking like that, then he would have went into a new growth pattern again. Because your sons will take you where you cannot go by yourself. See, this is where David almost blew the whole thing. David was never going to build the temple. God had already said, your sons will build the temple. And yet, David's not preparing his sons spiritually. David is so focused on his physical world, on his kingdom, upon the riches, on the throne, that he's neglecting the value of his sons. I've seen so many parents do this in life. They get so caught up with making money that it doesn't make sense. And they end up losing the very people that they should have cared about the most. The people that, oh, that's why I'm working, making the money. But the children do not read it that way. They read it as, you don't care about me. All you care about is your job. So God help us to be wise and not get to the top of the mountain and start the decline on the other side. And I've seen so many struggle trying to get back to the top of the mountain again. No, don't waste your opportunities of investing in the future. And so you have to ask the question in David's life, who was the most important person in David's life? Was it Goliath or Solomon? We all know the answer to that. It is Solomon. And yet the young warrior thinks killing the giants is the biggest thing in life. They think that is the greatest accomplishment in life, to kill the giants. And yet, without Solomon, there is not going to be any golden years for Israel. Without Solomon, David will die. There will be no temple and no Solomon to build it. The temple that Solomon was able to build with his father's resources and the blueprints that his father gave him of the temple, it was a cooperation. And with that, he built a temple that outlived both David and Solomon for 450 years. Now that's accomplishing something, when you can build a legacy that outlives you. But without Solomon, it's all over. It is finished. David, the young warrior, is focused only on killing the giant. And he thinks winning the battles of life is the greatest key to success. But the truth is, without our sons and daughters, we cannot reach our goals. If you would have told me as a young minister, and I began preaching when I was just a boy, from 11 years of age, and that now has been almost 60 years ago that I began involved in ministry. If you would have told me the greatest year of your life is going to come at the end of your life, I would have questioned, do you know what you're talking about? And yet it is. But the reason is because I'm not doing it alone. It's the young preachers that I've trained, the young ministers I've invested in, all of the teaching materials, the things that I've learned. I'm not going to take it to the grave with me. I'm determined I'm going to find a way to pass it on to the next generation. By doing so, when I'm dead, they will still be preaching, and the gospel will still be propagated. There will still be new churches being built, and there will be hundreds of thousands of people coming to Jesus Christ, not because I did it by myself, but because of the influence that I've been able to have on spiritual sons and daughters. Now, I pray that you understand through this lesson that training spiritual sons and daughters is just as important as killing any giant. And you may be in the youthful stage of your life, the young warrior, where killing the giant is the big thing. It is right now, but I'm telling you, life is a journey. And there will come a day, like David, when you'll face giants you cannot kill. If you have the proper relationship built with your men, you will be able to overcome it. And they will say, it's time now for you to give us counsel and let us kill the giants. Boy, that was wise advice. And so they formed a new covenant with him, saying, you stay in the city and give us instruction. We will go out and fight the battles for God and Israel. That is wisdom for every one of us. And wherever you are in your stage of life, and as I've mentioned, there are these 6 different stages. Wherever you are, start preparing now for the next stage. Start preparing now for where am I going to go in this journey? Who am I going to pass the baton to when my journey comes to an end? I don't want to drop the ball. I don't want to fumble the ball at the finish line. No way. I want to hand it off to one of my Timothys, one of my young preacher boys or girls, and give it to them and say, take the ball and run with it, and cheer them as they score the goal. That is wisdom. That is wisdom. And this is what David comes to understand and learn. It was almost too late for him when he discovered the fact the greatest thing in life is not things, it's people. It's the people with whom you have built relationships, people that love the same things that you love, people that are devoted to it. And when you are able to hand the baton to them, your Solomons will build temples that you only dreamed about. Your Elishas will do twice as many miracles as their Elijahs. Your Joshuas will lead the people into the promised land. Moses only got them into the wilderness. He got them out of Egypt, but he couldn't take them to the promised land without Joshua. And none of us are successful without a successor. Jesus understood that. That's why he poured himself into 12 men that he called his apostles. As he devoted himself and invested himself in them, they quickly multiplied to 120, the 120 into thousands. And today, millions and billions of people are worshiping Jesus Christ because he didn't fumble the ball. He passed it on to you and I. God, help us to learn from this lesson and help us to know how to be able to invest in the next generation so that they can accomplish even greater things than we have done by ourselves. I pray for you on your Christian journey that God will help you to understand, to gain the wisdom, to be able to be a great giant killer and then raise up spiritual sons that will kill the giants that you personally were not able to kill. May God bless you on your spiritual journey.